Here we are at another interview segment of Reunion Roadmap, and this time around we get to go to Centralia, Washington to meet Mark Randall, a man who has been instrumental in revitalizing Bina's website over the last few months. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Al. Good to be here.
I would encourage everyone to, if you haven't gone to our website at benayosefna.com, go and see what Mark's been doing. His handiwork is fantastic. We can actually navigate the site now. Things don't come to a crashing halt, and it's easy to upload. And as for the maintaining, well, I assume it's easier to maintain now that you have got things to where you want them. So first of all, thank you for that. And second of all, on behalf of all your many clients worldwide, thank you, because you're doing some necessary services that we all need.
Yeah, very welcome.
Now, folks, I have asked Mark to come on the show and just tell us his story, because as Mark, as you were relating it to me in our past conversations, this is like, it reminds me of Job in many ways. And others who have walked through some deep darkness, and yet the hand of the Lord is never far away. Redemption comes, blessing comes, glory to his name comes. So I'm just going to ask if you would share what you'd like with us, and I'll be quiet.
All right. Well, unlike Job, sometimes some of our turmoil is self-inflicted. Of course, I don't know that some of Job's was neither, but I for the most part, I wouldn't consider myself a biblical character in that realm. But my life has been an interesting life, and one that testifies to without a doubt, especially if people know me, testifies to the greatness and the goodness and the kindness and the mercy of the God that we serve. I guess, in saying how to give a testimony, I got to start from the beginning, because you can't really pull out the middle of it. You can, but it becomes, there's no context, as we've learned. Studying even scripture, you got to have context.
Oh, yes.
So I was born here in Washington, in Aberdeen, Washington, and my dad was a logger. I come from a family of dysfunction, and that would be an understatement, I guess. My dad was, like I said, a logger, and the typical logger from the 50s and 60s, violent, alcoholic, tough. It's a hard job, very hard job. Yeah, he was, what I learned later in life, probably the king of narcissists. And I never really realized that. But he had a traumatic childhood as well, which I'm not really privy to. His father's name I never even knew his dad's name. Well, until I was in my 20s. He'd never been mentioned. So that should tell you a little bit about how bad it was for him. But yeah, growing up with him, so he met my mom. In high school, they went to school in Montesano together. They were high school sweethearts, and my dad was a track star and just a all around fun guy to be around, I think. And my mom fell for him, and it was a roller coaster ride for her. They didn't last very long. They divorced when I was very young. I think I was 2. And my dad, like most narcissists, they don't like it when you make them pay, or when you make them face consequences. So the divorce was a consequence my dad wasn't willing to accept, so he terrorized my mother, and I was the tool for that. So it was pretty hard. So anyway, he took her to court, proved her unfit, and got custody of me at a very young age. I think I was 5. I remember when he came to get me from my grandma's. It was a traumatic event. And so became life with my dad. It was that way. I mean, terrible whoopings with the belt, and just, basically to shut up and not be heard from. And And I had a lot of issues. And I was, in school, I was terrible. I stole the lunch money and jewelry from my stepmom, and because he remarried, and she was a good friend to me, but unfortunately, she was my dad's wife as well. And so, yeah, I had some problems in school, lying, stealing, petty stuff, but all pretty indicative of what I know now to be just a direct result of trauma and abuse, looking for attention, and take it any way you can get it, right? Whether it's good or bad. Yeah, he didn't put up with that very well. I mean, discipline was pretty strict. I could probably do 100 push-ups without even batting an eye when I was 6. And yeah, just I guess he got to the point where he just didn't want to deal with me anymore. So at 7 years old, he started threatening to get rid of me. Tell me he would just give me to the state. And back then you could do that. In this state, they had it's called incorrigibility laws, and if you didn't want to deal with your kid, especially if they were a problem, you just give them up to the state. And he tried that. I remember he tried it when I was 8 first, and they didn't have room. Matter of fact, I went out and sat on the porch. He made me go out and sit on the porch while he went and called the receiving center, and he came out and told me, he says, "You're lucky they don't have room," right? So I was okay for a while. But anyway, he was successful in that. When I was 10 years old, he gave me up to the state. And that was terrible. I mean, I didn't understand things, didn't understand where I was, why I was there, why everybody just left me. Nobody visited, no visits, no letters, no contact. And of course, all the rest of my family had pretty well cut off relationship with my dad. When my mom inquired about me, his response was always that I was at a friend's house, I wasn't home. So she didn't actually know for over a year that I was in an institution. I was in Echo Glen here in Washington State. And when she found out, by the time she found out, I was a wreck. I mean, I was angry, I was confused, and I just wanted to make all adults pay. That's just the way I felt. I just hated every adult. And I was just terror. I wasn't really a violent person, but I was just a terror. I just caused all the trouble I could possibly cause. And when my mom found out, I guess she had been working with my counselor there at Echo Glen before she came up and actually visited me the first time, because the counselor knew that I was, going to have some real problems with her. Anyway, so yeah, she came up to start visiting me, and then was going to take me home. And that was a problem for me, because actually what I had found is that being in institutions was better than being at home, and I didn't want to leave. We got to do a lot of activities. We had a lake there at Echo Glen, so we built rafts and fishing, went camping, went hiking. And I was like, no, I ain't going home. I don't want to go home. So I ran away from the institution, hoping that that would get me in trouble. And so that was the start. So I ran away. I came home. My mom wasn't prepared to deal with me. She had no idea how rebellious I'd become, and obstinate would be an understatement. And so yeah, that didn't last very long, and it ended up really ugly. And so I ended up going back to the institution. They took me back. She couldn't handle me. When I went and talked to my probation officer one time, she had already told the probation officer I had to go. She was scared of me. And so when I got there, the cops were waiting for me, and that didn't really help my frame of mind. So it then just kept consistently started getting worse. So anyway, I ran away constantly. I learned that I could be out of the institution if I kept running. So I did. I ran. And back then in the days, those days in the 70s, juvenile institutions weren't a pleasure either. Discipline there was very harsh, and we didn't have any advocates like we have today for anything. So they just take you out back and deal with you. And isolation cells, the holes, what they called them, yeah, this discipline was terrible. You did what they said or else. I mean, that was the way it went. So, and I bounced from one institution to the other and from one escape to the next. And I became known as a problem, just a problem in the system. I wasn't gonna, I did not care about submitting. That was not happening. I'm not gonna submit. So, and it kind of transitioned from there. So by the time I was 17 years old, I was starting to realize how really messed up my life was. I mean, I had 36 felonies at 17 years old, and most of them I had never been to court on. The way the juvenile system was is they didn't need to take it to court actually. The probation officer just, they, so every time they sent me back to an institution, they would have a reason for it, whether it was, you broke into this house. Well, there was no court. It's just burglary's the charge, and that goes on the record. So I had this long record and only been to court a couple times. And not that I hadn't done these things. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I did, but there was, it was an odd system that wasn't very just or fair. But so by the time I was 17, I'd been in every juvenile institution in the state, and that was a lot. I don't know, dozens, and none of them wanted me back. No, none of them would take me. So I had a run-in with my mom at 17 and broke into a bunch of apartments, assaulted a bunch of people, and it was on a New Year's. So I was drunk and messed up and just out of control, and committed an enormous amount of burglaries in the apartment complex that she lived in, stashed everything in her house. It was, yeah, terrible. So anyway, the judge had had enough. They'd had enough, and no institution would take me back. So they remanded me to adult status. They made me an adult at 17 years old, sent me to the Yakima County Jail, which was my first dose of adult incarceration. And being young, I was a young kid. I wasn't big. Long hair was the thing in the 70s. And yeah, I wasn't very big. So it was a problem. Men in jail situations like that are not very pleasant. So they kept me separate from the main population for a while until I turned 18. And then they put me in in the main cell and main tank. And that was just, it was terrible. So, and then so they had charged me with a bunch of burglaries and stuff. And they ended up sending me to Shelton, which is the beginning of the correction center here, prisons in Washington State. And then it's was a diagnostic center where they tested you and decided which institution, which prison they were going to send you to, which facility. And then they had a population side of that too. So for younger people, instead of sending them to the major prisons. So they decided that was the best place for me. The guards in the prison system were not a joy either. You don't do what they say, well, they just put you down. So that was the problem. Anyway, I decided after I got beat up the first time by the guards there that I was not going to stay there. And since I was a master of escaping, I figured I could get out of there. I knew they had guns in the guard towers at the prison, though, right? And we planned it for quite some time. We waited until it was foggy because we are notorious for our fog here. We called it parole dust in the prisons because you can walk around and not be seen. So we decided to wait for the day, and we waited for the day. The day that came it was so foggy you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So we went down. We had purchased some wire cutters. We cut the fence between two guard towers, and we'd made to the first fence and was cutting on the second fence when we heard the patrol jeep coming. So we ran back to the lodge to wait for it to go through. And one of the guys, there was a guy over time that people had found out what we were doing. He wanted to go with us. And we told him no. Well, he didn't take too kindly to that, so he ended up ratting us out. So when we went back to the hall, the guards came in, they apprehended us, threw us in our cells, and ended up getting beat up again. My punishment for that was 14 months in the hole. That's an
Mhm.
enormous amount of time in isolation cell. Um, that was hard. That was really hard. Yeah, I got out once a week for an hour into a fenced in yard. But other than that, I was in a 4x8 box for
Wow.
14 months.
If I could break in here, Mark, for just a minute, I had opportunity years ago to visit the Army's disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth.
Mm-hmm.
And the system they described there, I'm sure you're very familiar with similar things,
Mm-hmm.
but and they told us about the isolation cells.
Mm-hmm.
There, at least, the inmates were allowed out for 30 minutes a day, but you're saying an hour a week. And at this
Well,
point,
right.
you're 18.
I was 18 years old. Mm-hmm. Yep, just turned 18. And they don't, so they were actually supposed to give you an hour a day. That's the law, but that didn't happen.
Okay, and that gets to another aspect of the penal system in the United States. It doesn't matter what state or territory you're talking about. What's on the books is one thing. What actually happens that may not get to a judge or to anyone else is another.
Mm-hmm.
And this I've heard from people on both sides, law enforcement friends and others like yourself who've spent some time.
Well, things aren't like that no more.
Mm.
We're talking about the 70s,
Yeah.
just the late 70s. And yeah, it was not a fun place to be. They didn't care about laws or lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What's on the books is once you're in the system and you lost your rights like that, you really had no rights. So to be fair, I'm not opposed to that hard of a system. I think that it should not be a fun experience.
Right.
If
Right.
you go that route, if that's where you're at, I've always felt that way. I never felt like I was being unfairly treated. I never felt like I was undeserving of the times that I was sentenced. I did what I did, and and on all practicality, before they actually sent me to the prison system, they were going to do a diversion system because it was my first time, and I had to take a polygraph test in order, and and they would have sent me to a halfway house. But part of the requirements for that was I had to admit to every crime I'd committed in the last prior 2 years, not been caught for. And in exchange for that, they'd grant me immunity for that county, but it helped them clear their books. Well, I swung a deal with my attorney and the prosecuting attorney where they granted me immunity for the entire state of Washington and Oregon. And I would let them have it. And I ended up admitting to over 700 felony crimes. And those were mostly petty, right? But burglary, auto thefts, and they were calculating how many crimes a day that was. And I'm like, well, this was survival for me. It wasn't just being a hoodlum. It was survival for me. When you're on the streets and you're a teenager, and I lived in Seattle, I lived in Portland, I lived on the streets of some of the bigger cities, you can't go get a job, right? So your only alternative is thievery, and so a lot of petty crimes, but they're still felonies. And I admitted to all these crimes, and by the time I was done, they were just like, yeah, no, this person needs to be locked up forever. That was their opinion. Yeah, so after the escape attempt that I made, that really changed the way the system dealt with me. And they'd figured it was time for me to move up to the big boys jails, prisons. And so they sent me, so I got the 14 months in the hole isolation. They took all of my good time away from me, which meant I was going to do my sentence was 3.5 years. I was going to do all my time. So, and then they sent me to Monroe. And Monroe back then, Monroe Reformatory in Washington was a terrible place. 65% of the population at that time were Vietnam vets, and they were not your typical Vietnam vet. They were whacked out of their minds. They were violent, and they come home from the war. They were just not able to adapt to society. So it was an extremely violent place, and that's an understatement. I did not have no idea what I was entering into. And nobody would have. I mean, even from the day that chain bus rolled up into that place, and they lined you up on the line, and you could see up to the cells, and people were yelling and screaming, and that's my punk there. I know that guy. That guy's a rat. And I'm just like, I was in shock. And the guards up there with their M16s and their sunglasses just looks like a typical movie theater, only it's for real, right? And as they herded us inside, there were lines of inmates lined up along the hallway. And I watched people as people would just kind of disappear. They would grab them and away they would went. I mean, they would gag them and they would take them away. They'd stick a sock in their mouth and away they went, and guards just looked the other way. And I'm like, I didn't know. I have no idea what was happening. And those were probably child molesters, or if I found out later, or snitches, or something like that. And it was that way. The inmates basically ran that prison at the time. They ran all the Walla Walla and Monroe. That's the way it was. And again, you're talking about Vietnam vets. These aren't, street punks. These are combat veterans that are violent and capable, right? So that's what the administration was dealing with, these kind of people. So yeah, so I think, from day one, it's very racial, very racial. It was terrible. I don't think there was a day or too many days that I can remember that went by that I wasn't severely beaten, constantly challenged, things taken from you. It was just terrible. And I was a white guy that wasn't a lifer or have connections with bikers and stuff like that. So I wasn't part of that, genre of people. So it was horrific. Got stabbed, got beat. It was, it's a hard experience. So, as a matter of fact, I didn't think I was ever going to get out of there. To me, leaving became not something you even thought about. I didn't think I'd live to see that. Yeah, I remember when they told me it was, they came in the night before and told me I was rolling up the next day. And I was like, rolling up where? And they're like, you're being released. And I just like, at the time I think my roommate was in the hole. So I didn't have a cellmate with me, but I was in shock. Even then I couldn't believe I actually made it home. Well, I hadn't made it to the gate yet, because once people find out you're leaving, now there's a whole nother set of rules, right? Because some people don't like people to get out. They're not getting out. There's many people that are never getting out, right? So then I had to make it to the door, but I did anyway. And they didn't want to let me go. They sent me to a halfway house up in Port Angeles, and it was very hard integrating back into society. Colors, sounds, everything was just a shock, and I had no idea how to live. I didn't. So prior to leaving, they sent you to a pre-release center because they realized there had to be a deprogramming when you left the prison system in those days. So they sent me to a facility where they actually, as a pre-release center, and that's what they did. They deprogrammed you pretty much, got you prepared for paying bills, writing checks, paying rent, getting a job, which none of which I'd ever had any instruction on in my entire life. I had no idea how to function in real life. And yeah, I did not pass that very well. So they really didn't want to let me go. I was still a menace to society as far as they were concerned, but they did have to let me go at some point because they kept me past my release date. And I ended up bullying my way out, threatening with lawsuits and stuff. So they kicked me out, and I was out 7 days. And some people had helped me out. They give me some place to live, some food and stuff, because I really had no clue. I mean, a lot of people take these things for granted, how you're raised on how to transition in adulthood. I was not. I had no idea. To me, everything was handed to me. I mean, I lived in institutions, and my food was provided, housing was provided. I had no bills, I didn't know what that was, unless it was paying for protection. That was about the only bill that I knew about. Yeah. So, yeah. So, and these guys, in exchange for helping me out, as it turns out, they wanted something. So they asked me to forge a prescription for them. They were drug addicts, and I didn't do drugs at the time. And I said, sure, I'll give it a try. And I didn't do very well. So when I had the prescription to the pharmacist, he clearly knew right away it was a forgery. So they called the cops. Well, I was waiting for it to be filled. They came in and they got me, which was an ugly scene too. Because I didn't want to go peacefully, needless to say. So, and they ended up taking me back to the county jail there. And I just, I had no example of faith in my life.
Yeah.
God was not in the picture. I say that, but looking back now, though, there were moments. Like I have this tattoo on my forearm here. It's a dove. And I remember I took it off a book of Acts. I gotten somewhere in Shelton. And that's where that tattoo came from. A dove, the Acts dove. So I did, but I didn't have any real contact with any kind of faith issues. I knew my mom had some religious fanatic things going on in her life, but I had no exposure to my mom. I was, like I said, I was taken from her, and she had her moments of up and down too. So the times I wasn't in contact with her, she wasn't really serving God enough to influence me. I know she had a relationship with the Lord, but it wasn't now looking back, but I wasn't really aware of how that operated. But so here I am 7 days back. They're threatening me. They're going to they want to send me back and make me finish out my maximum sentence, which is 10 years. And I could not stomach the thought of going back into prison. And I remember, I was in the county jail for a number of months while I was going to court. I was an ex-convict at a county jail, and I pretty much had my way there. I wanted your food, you gave it to me because I was crazy. I had no reservations I never worried about getting beat up. I'd been beat up so many times. Getting beat up is just not a problem for me. And so actually, I think I enjoyed getting beat up. There's that self-destruction thing going on too. I hated myself, hated life pretty much. So I had a reputation, I guess, that helped me get by in the county jail. And nighttime was the only quiet time in jail. And I had gotten into the habit of, getting up at night and reading and spending time without the noise. One night I got up and I just seen life. I seen my future. I seen it, and there was no hope. I knew I was screwed up, with my criminal record. What could I do? I can't even get a job, for crying out loud. Who would be in the right mind would hire me? I had no family, no friends that weren't crooks. My brain was messed up. The way I thought, everything that I did was just messed up. I just knew that I was so beyond any kind of help. There's no system designed to help me. Matter of fact, the work release that I'd went to, first they originally sent me to one in Pasco. I'd been out before I went to Port Angeles, that is. And I realized how screwed up I was. And I actually asked the counselor for help. And when the counselor asked me what I needed help with, and I explained to him, when I'm walking down the street, for example, someone catches eye contact with me, my response is looking at him like, what in the hell are you looking at? Because you don't catch eye contact with somebody in my world unless you're challenging them. So you walk with your eyes down, or if you're looking up, you're just looking for trouble. You're looking for a fight. You're looking to be challenged or challenge other people. And I said, so I'm having a hard time relating to people. And their response to that was, okay. And as next thing I know, I'm being rolled up the next day. Police come and got me and took me out of there put me in the county jail in Pasco because I was, again, a threat to society. If that's the way you're going to relate to people, challenge everybody you come in contact with out on the streets, they didn't want nothing to do with me. Anyway, that was the first halfway house. And then they released me in this Port Angeles. I got arrested a few days later, a week later, went back to the jail. And here I'm sitting there at nighttime one day, just kind of reflecting on where my life's been and where it could possibly go. And it was just hopeless. There was just it was just completely hopeless. And killing myself, I had tried that early on, and I just wasn't built for that.
Hmm.
I couldn't, yeah, I just couldn't do it.
Hmm.
I would just go through whatever life dealt me, but I wasn't, that was just not one way that I could go. And I don't know where those feelings came from, but I can look back now and see why that is. Those were out of my control too. But here I am looking forward, and I'm just like, I'm screwed. And my language is not like it is today. Now, every
Yeah.
other word was a 4-letter word. That was my culture and my language.
Mhm.
And that's how I prayed out. I cried out to God with that language.
Hmm.
So when people are worried about how God is going to interact or answer them, they're worried about using the correct name or the language or tone or humble or, well, I can testify that that's not necessary.
Hmm.
You don't have to come in some particular fashion.
Wow. Mark, that reminds me of something I heard back in high school. My upbringing was far different from yours, but I remember I think it may have been one of our coaches, one of our teachers in our Christian school,
Mhm.
telling about the most interesting sinner's prayer he had ever heard.
Hmm.
Because he was out with the team, I think in Southern California, but it was a beach scene, and they found a guy who was interested in a gospel presentation. And this was the hippie era,
Mhm.
so he was not all there, with drugs or whatever substances, but he was paying attention to the gospel.
Hmm.
And when they invited him to give his life to Jesus, the prayer was, okay, come on in.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. And it speaks to the grace of our God and the great desire he has for us to come into relationship with him.
Beyond that, even, I did not have no understanding of God.
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't, you can't walk this earth, especially in the United States, and not know that there's a God, that there's this Jesus. But I mean, so I knew the words. I'm not living in that big of a bubble. People that were hanging out in the chapel in the prisons I was in, these were child molesters that were sliding by, or people that were just scared, right? And that was like a safe place for. So no, that's what's in the chapel. So there's no way I'm going to the chapel. I'm not
Mhm.
going to get labeled like these guys. So I mean, what we all know what Jesus. We've heard this name Jesus. I mean, people use religion and the prison systems like a fine-tuned instrument to get what they want. So I knew, that there's a God. Like I said, I'm not living in a cave, but I had no understanding of what that meant and who that was or nothing. So my prayer to God was, with a lot of F words, was,
Mhm.
God, I don't know if you exist. I don't really care if you exist. I just need help if you're
Mhm.
real. That's it.
Mhm.
No repentance. Just that. That's it.
Yeah.
And what happened to me, I I wasn't prepared for. I guess I didn't expect him to answer first. I like I said, I didn't have no realization that there would even be a God. It was like a last ditched effort before you end up falling off the cliff. So what happened to me though was I hadn't cried since I was a child. Tears just weren't part of my reality, and tears just rolled down my face. I wasn't bawling, but uncontrollably tears were just coming out of my eyes and rolling down my face. And thankfully, I was the only one up, because I was worried. I mean, somebody's going to see me crying, and that's not going to go good for me, right? So I went to I just couldn't stop it. I'm not kidding. They're just flowing out my eyes, and I'm just like, what in the world is going on here? And I went back into the back of the tank there, and where my bunk was, and I kind of just hunkered down in my bed there so nobody could see me because I could not stop these tears from flowing. And this went on for all practical purposes all night. I was just a sopping, wet mess. My bed was drenched, my clothes were drenched, and I'm just like, and then finally, and I must have drifted off to sleep or something, and I woke up and I'm wet. Everything was wet. And I'm just like, well, it just happened. But something had happened. And I don't know how to lay my finger on it, but things had changed inside. I don't know how to describe it. Just in my brain, in my being, things would change. And I'm just like, what in the heck do I do now? I don't know what to do now. Because it was obvious that the God of the universe somehow just answered me.
Mm.
So now I'm confronted with another reality. And so the only thing I think of is to call my mother. And the last person that I want to hear from you is my mom. If you could knew some of the things that I did to her and terrorized her. And so I said, okay. So I went and I got her phone number from the jail guard because she was listed as a contact. And I called her. I did not expect her to answer, and I did not expect her to accept the call because you have to call collect from the jail. And I called her, and she answered, and she accepted the call. And I briefly told her what had just happened, and she knew that I was telling the truth. And my mom didn't waste any time. She lived in Yakima, which is quite a ways away, and her and some of the elders of the church she went to immediately came up and they piled me up with books, and that's what tapes and stuff, because it was the other thing. They got me a cassette player that I could listen to tapes, and I just and yeah, it was just an amazing time. Actually, like I said, the fact that my mom even believed me was just a miracle in itself, and she said she had no doubt about it. But my mom had to witness and watch all the things that I'd gone through in my life that I guess I never had no concept of her grieving for me. But my mom told me later that she prayed for me daily.
Mm.
And I believe, Al, 100% that God answers prayer, and he answered her prayer.
Amen.
This was just the beginning. Now I'm really screwed because something happened inside me I wasn't prepared for. I had this problem. I had a conscience problem I'd never had before. And yeah, instead of taking people's food, I was giving away what I didn't want. And these changes were just, they were outside of my control. They just started happening, I mean, I'm actually being kind to people, talking to people. And people thought I was setting them up. There was something wrong, I was up to something, but yeah, all these changes just happened because so my conversation that night with the Lord was, listen, here's the deal. I can't change, and I'm not going to try to change. I know how screwed up I am. You don't like something in my being, you deal with it. I'm not even going to try. It's pointless. How? From what angle would I come? How would I correct myself? And that was the way I came to the Lord. So there was no repentance. And I think the Lord showed me later on, it wasn't really necessary for repentance. First off, I had nothing, repentance is really turning around from the way you are and getting back in line. Well, what if you were never in line? What are you returning to? I didn't have there was no repentance. I didn't repent. I had no repentance for many years. There was no moment of repentance in my life. I never apologized for anything I did wrong. Even after this new found relationship with the Lord, I just didn't apologize for anything. And I can look back on that now and I have a different opinion of that. I don't think that God had mercy. When repentance took place, probably 20 years, 25 years later, and I remember it clearly. I was driving down. Actually, I was driving down to Hebrew Nation Radio from Tacoma one day, and I was going down to see Don and Cindy. which is a later part of the story, but I'm just telling you the repentance thing is I and I just in my head I'm just like, Lord, is there anything I need to repent for? Because I don't know. If there is, could you bring that to mind? I had to pull over. It was I was flooded with all these things that I had done, that people I'd hurt, taken advantage of, used. Because if you came in contact with me, Al, it was not going to be good for you or your bank account or your life. It just
Yeah.
wasn't. So even after this, so this is at 20 years old now that I had this moment in the county jail. But this is the beginning of this journey. And there's no easy way around this. Okay. It isn't a happy ever after thing. I mean, I got out of there in miraculous fashion. Instead of giving me more time, they actually released me. That's a whole nother story in itself too. God performed, these amazing miracles that are just undeniable, undeniable. And I needed that. I needed some undeniable evidence that this was for real. And while I was in the jail, they made me a trustee, which is stupid in the first place. Make somebody like me a trustee. And one of the inmates there asked me to. I went to court. They sentenced me to a year in jail. That was my. So they weren't sending me back. They gave me a year in the county jail. So during that, and then they made me a trustee. So they made me a trustee, and one of the guys in one of the tanks asked me if I would. He said his girlfriend was visiting him. She was going to drop off some weed in the visiting room and wanted me to pick it up for him. I'm like, yeah, sure, of course. That's what you do. I mean, you don't tell somebody no. You just, of course, you're a trustee. That's what you do. So I went in afterwards. My job was sweeping the floors. I went into the visiting room. I grabbed the weed. I stuck it in my sock. I found it underneath the visiting in the table, and it was kind of like one circular motion, right? And as I'm leaving, I heard the control room door open, and a number of cop shoes, right? The clickety clicks click on the floor, and I'm like, I knew they were behind me, so I just kind of made a quick beeline to the common bathroom that was there, and just as they were catching up to me, I went down, I ripped my socks, like in jail you got sandals on, right? And I ripped my sock off, and I flushed it down the toilet just as they tackled me. And it's like, so they locked me down. They knew it was there. They'd found it already, and they were waiting to see who was going to pick it up. So they had pictures of it. I wasn't going to get out of this, even though I got rid of the evidence. So they threw me in the hole, and it was just like, oh boy, here we go again. And they charged me with the smuggling this into the cell there. Oh, it was a mess. It was a mess. So, yeah, they already told me they were going to send me back to the prison. That my probation officer said he was done with me. That's it. No more chances. That's it. We're done with you. And my mom was, pretty distressed over it, but there was just nothing you could do. And we ended up, so they really did. They charged me, and they were going to violate my parole. Back then it was parole, wasn't probation. They were going to violate my parole and just make me finish out my max, which would have been 7 years. And we got into the courtroom, and my prayer to the Lord was like, you know what? Whatever. I did this. Lord, if you want me back in jail, I have all the confidence in the world you'll be there with me as well. So, but I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to have to re-enter the convict world, but I wasn't going to have any choice. The prosecutor already knew. My lawyer told me he was a Jew. Last name was Yosef, Mr. Yosef, and he was a heck of a lawyer. He had a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and he's a little short, dark-skinned guy. He didn't think there was much he could do for me, but he would represent me the best he could. And he said that as far as he knew, the prosecutor and the probation officer both recommended that I be violated and sent back to Monroe or Walla Walla even. Anyway, so we got up to court, and right before my case, they recessed. I'm the last case of the day, and I'm like, that's weird. And the whole atmosphere in the court changed. And the court clerk is shuffling around the prosecutor's paper, during the recess, and just kind of playing games. And I'm just like watching this. I'm like, what's going on here? Something's changed in the courtroom. The whole atmosphere changed. So anyway, the judge comes back, they reconvene, and they get me up there. And remember, the probation officer leaned over the rail to me, and he just looked right dead in the face. He said, "You are out of here. We are so done with you." And I'm just like, okay, So I get up there in front of the judge, and my lawyer says something like, "Your Honor, I don't think it would do any good to violate Mr. Randall, send him back to prison." He said, "I would recommend that we release him to the custody of his mother in Yakima, where he has community support." And I'd made it specifically clear to my lawyer, we're not talking about faith here. I'm not using God as an excuse to get out of nothing. He said, no, he has community support that he's never had. And I just think it would be more beneficial for Mr. Randall to have support and integrate back into society than to send him back to prison. And the judge looks over at the prosecutor first and says, "Do you have any objection to that?" And the prosecutor, you know how it is in a courtroom, you got to speak. The stenographers take it. If you don't speak, they'll say, could you speak up? Because it's got to be recorded, right? And the prosecutor just nods his head. No. He says, no. Shakes his head, no. And he looks over at my probation officer. He says, Mr. Hollitz was his name. He says, "Mr. Hollitz, do you have any objection?" He's like, no. And the judge says, "Okay, so ordered. Let's draft up some papers and get him released to the custody of his mother." And my lawyer's like, "What the heck is going on here? This is stupid, right? This is totally abnormal." And so my lawyer, we get done with the court here, and my lawyer kind of just slides up against the wall. He's like, "What the hell just happened?" my mom's like, "Well, Mr. Rios, sometimes things are just out of our control, right? Some things are just not as they seem, and God performs miracles that are beyond our understanding." And there was no explanation for this. So once the dust settled, I've never seen my probation officer silenced, for one thing, and I certainly couldn't believe nobody spoke a word and nobody said nothing about it. The judge just entered the order, and it was just that simple. I was up on charges, just a violation hearing. So once the dust cleared, though, and they started talking, because they don't just let me go, I still have a sentence to complete in the county jail that I was on, right?
Right.
Then they started, and I think they were trying to figure out what happened to who. So they decided, they had a hearing, a pre-release hearing. I'm not sure what they called it, but they decided that they were going to have to set up some conditions of my release, because they hadn't been even discussed. You don't just release somebody. I still got a sentence left to carry out. So it was just very odd. Like I said, there was no discussion of this in the courtroom. The judges, when they nodded, shook their heads no, he just said, "Okay, so ordered," and that was it. So there was nobody had documentation prepared for a release. So anyway, they created a program for me, which actually is in effect to today. It was a new program. It was called intensive parole, and they decided that I would have to report to my probation officer in Yakima daily by phone, and weekly in person. And I was that was very strict requirements. I mean, it was a zero tolerance release, right? So they did not make me even finish out my year sentence. I had like 3 or 4 months left on my year sentence. So they credited it in good time. They gave me good time, even though I wasn't that good. I mean, I tried to smuggle in marijuana, right? So it was just really weird. Yeah, it's within a few days I was released, and I went to Yakima to my mother's house, and I decided that I wasn't going to report to the parole officer. I decided that if I was gonna, because this was a God thing to me, it was very obvious. I'm just like, okay, well, if this is the way it's gonna go, if I'm gonna have to readjust here, I need to put all this behind me. I need to be able to move forward, and I can't be dealing with this nonsense if I'm gonna go forward. So I just didn't call.
Mm.
And about 3 or 4 days later, the probation officer called me. He's like, "Mr. Randall, do you understand the conditions of your release?" I'm like, "I do." He says, "Well, are you going to report? Did you plan on reporting? Would it be possible to get you to, grace us with your presence where you're supposed to be?" And I'm like, "That's not going to happen." He's like, "What do you mean it's not going to happen?" I'm saying, "Well, here's the deal. Y'all held me 6 months past my release date from prison. 6 months. That's a major lawsuit. And I'd used this before, but I'd never really pushed it, right?
Mm.
So either I said, you let me go, you let me be, you know where I am, you let me be. I won't sue you. I won't sue you. I just need to start over." He's like, "Yeah, it's not going to work that way." But you know what? I never heard from him again.
Mm.
And like 6 or 8 months later, I got my minimum custody papers from the parole board, and they told me I had to write them once a year. I never did, and that was it. They just kind of let me go. That wasn't the end of things. That was kind of the beginning. I got married. I had a couple kids, and that didn't really go real well. Um, I still had a lot of things in my head that needed to be fixed, right? I mean, you don't become normalized all of a sudden when God shines his love on you. It's not all better. There's a journey to come. So, there was about a 4 or 5 year period there, Al, where I was okay, married, okay. And then I just couldn't, I felt myself not being able to maintain this kind of life anymore. I felt like I was faking it, that it was just wasn't working. I was working in the farm in an orchard there in Yakima. I wasn't making any money. Just like, yeah, this isn't going to work for me. So I decided I needed to go do something. And I didn't want my kids and or my wife around when I did what I was going to do. And so I left my wife, left my kids, decided to go back to Seattle and a life of crime with more intention, though. It wasn't just on escape anymore, committing petty crimes. I actually went at it full force. So I was probably worse off than I had ever been by a long shot. I became much more clear on the focus of making money. And I knew God was with me, though, even in that,
Mm.
oddly enough. I had a lot of things going on. I sold drugs, I grew pot, I manufactured them, and I had a nice little crew that I ran. And it wasn't always pleasant. I mean, we did some pretty terrible things. And I was very focused on, making that money and not really thinking about the consequences, and, a lot of firearms and violence involved, and shootouts in my home, and people trying to rob me, and one thing after another. And it was obvious to me that the Lord was with me, but he wasn't helping me by any means. I was just aware that God was there, but I had this problem, like I said, this conscience problem.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't shake it. I knew in order to be a good crook, like you got to let that go. You can't be worried about, how people are affected by what you're doing. Yeah. So in 1992, I got busted. So my group of people, we manufacturing meth on a large scale for a lot of biker gangs up and down the coast. And there was no way out. Once we got into that position, there was no way out of it. They weren't going to let us stop. So I got pulled over, and I got pulled over once with a guy in the car. I was thoroughly addicted to cocaine, and I kept my dealer with me when I'd go on my little binges. He would just sit here. That's it. You go do runs when I needed you to go get me drugs.
Hmm.
So we were in the car. I got pulled over. We were in the car, and I had told the guy, I was in the passenger seat, he was driving, and I told him when we get out of the car, where the cops were behind us, and I said, when you pull over, get out of the car and lock the car. I had firearms in there. I had, an enormous amount of money and drugs. And I asked him to throw the drugs away out the window. He did not throw the drugs out the window. So we pulled over. As it turns out, he had gotten arrested earlier in the day and had agreed to set me up. I did not know that.
Hmm.
So we pulled over, cops surrounded us. And I got out of the car, I locked my car, and I realized right away I'd forgot my gun, because that was the way I was going to go out. I wasn't going to, they weren't taking me back to jail. And right away I was like, oh no, I forgot my gun. And anyway, they tackled me, they arrested me. And I had a lot of money though, so I was able to afford a good defense. And it took them a number of years. And finally, after a long, drawn out stories, they sent me back to prison, back to Walla Walla Penitentiary. So it wasn't over. Like I said, this journey doesn't just stop, because you cry out to the Lord. God doesn't hit you with a magic wand and all of a sudden everything gets better. And actually, I said, mine got worse, Al. But I didn't have this, I didn't have a relationship with the Lord that was out of obedience. I was not obedient by any means, obviously. And I just feel like God had all this mercy and grace for me, though. And even through all these things that I was doing terribly wrong. And when I went to Walla Walla this time, it was different. My frame of mind was different. I made plans for when I got out. I actually formulated some business plans. I didn't get wrapped up in the prison life. And I'm older. So I'm in my 30s. I'm not a kid no more. So it's a little different. I knew a lot of people in the system because I grew up with them. And plus, some of my hoodlum friends from the streets were in there. And I'd made plans when I got out. I was made plans. Me and a friend, we were going to go to Alaska. We were going to get a job on a fishing boat up there, and we were going to come back. We were going to work for, 4 or 5 months. We were going to save up all this money. We were going to come back. We were going to do a major 1,000-plant outdoor marijuana grow operation, and then we were going to, retire. And so I did my time there in Walla Walla. I went home, and I was up on this mountain where I used to go to pray, read my Bible, and I was up there with a friend of mine who was a preacher. He was a pastor, and he was talking to me, and I wasn't listening to him. I had a checklist I was going through in my head. Got to go do this, got to go do that, got to go do this, got to get that in order. And all of a sudden, now I heard this thing. It said, he just said, change of plans, son. And it was really, what was interesting about that, because I wouldn't say I ever heard the voice of the Lord before, but that was clearly the Lord. And that's all he said, change of plans, son. And what was interesting about that, Al, was the way my body responded. It's like, okay, all right, that's it. All those plans right out the window. What am I going to do now? I don't know. We'll see.
Hmm.
Change whatever the plan is. So I went and got a job, and I started I guess you could say, it was about reprogramming my brain. That's what I had to do. I had no value of a dollar because of all the money that come to my hands and the way I'd lived. So I got a job cleaning houses, and that's a lowly position, but that's what I did for a number of years. And then I started a carpet cleaning business, and I just kind of kept going from there and there, working hard, trying to get, trying to become, I guess, normal in some sense. I wasn't really thinking normal, just a productive person in society. non-criminal, right? Not a bad guy. And that went for well for a while. For a while, that went well. But I was doing things on my own. Again, I'm not asking the Lord for help. I'm not asking God for help. I know He's there, but I'm really working out all these things on my own. And I think to some degree, God honors that. But again, I'm the one putting all these things together. And it went well for about a decade. And then slowly things start sliding, right? Things start changing, I mean, you can only, how long can you actually do good on your own? I don't know. But it lasted a while for me, and started slowly shifting back into a weird frame of mind, and ended up getting hooked back up with my dad, who lived in Closing, over in the Hoods Canal. And that was weird, getting involved in his life again. But there was always that need, right, to want to have a dad, parents, and he hadn't changed, though. So in that interaction there, I had met a girl in Quilcene, moved in together. Things were going well for a while, but then all of a sudden it's like, here I am, I'm doing drugs again. My girlfriend's doing drugs. Everybody's working for me. I'm cutting trees now. I've had a tree cutting business where I cut specialty woods, maple and alder and stuff. And everybody's just doing drugs. It's just, yeah. And I remember, so some friends of mine that I grew up with there in the local town of Quilcene, I'd known. I went to school with their dad early on, came to me one day and asked me if I would buy some wood that they had cut. They were going to cut a figured maple tree. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll buy it. So they cut this tree and they brought it to me in pieces, and they had cut it all wrong. They turned an $80,000 tree into firewood. And I was just like, I can't help you. And they're like, well, I know how much work they put into it. So they asked me if they, what can we do? I said, well, take it out we had a local mill there in Quilcene. So take it out to the mill. And they had a permit of mine on file. I said, run it through to my permit. So I called the mill. I said, hey, the Reeves kids are coming out. They're going to bring you some wood. Just run it through, whatever you get, whatever they can out of it. Use my permit, because you had to have permits to cut maple. It's a protected tree, just like cedar. And they did, and they took it out there. As it turns out, 2 years later, the Forest Service, federal marshals, and the sheriff showed up my door, arrested me. As it turns out, that tree, they cut it out of the national park.
Uh-oh.
Yep. And at the time, I had been reestablishing a relationship with my mother as well, too, to find out she had terminal cancer. And we were getting along real well. It was a good reconciliation of relationship, but I knew it was going to be short-lived. I mean, we didn't know how long she had. She had ovarian cancer, which is, there's no fix to that. And yeah, so now I get charged. I get charged with this crime I didn't even do. I knew, well, I had involvement in it. I mean, they did ask me to go out and look at the tree that they were cut down. I did go out and look at it. I actually marked it out when they cut it down. I marked it out where to cut it. It didn't dawn on me, though, that it was a national park. I didn't think about it, but it was. And so they charged me, and so now I've got federal charges against me, and the feds don't play.
No.
It's serious. They wanted me to plead guilty, and I told them I would not. They offered me a year's home monitoring, probation, and a year's home monitoring. I said, you could offer me a $50 fine. I wouldn't take it. I didn't do this. And yeah, that was a ignorant thing to do, to challenge the federal government. But anyway, long story short, they ended up charging me. And I remember one day I was in the shower where I often spend a lot of time talking to God in the shower. I'm just like, God, how is this going to get better? How am I going to get out of this? And the Lord really showed me, you're going to jail. I'm like, no, no, we don't have to do that. And I felt the Lord tell me, he's like, yep, I need your undivided attention. And there's just a few things in your decision-making process that needs to change. Now, remember, this is 2010. So I'm 50 years old. So this journey, I called out to the Lord. Remember this now when I was 20, I'm 50 at this time. And I was just like, okay, well, I guess, when God says you're going to jail, there's no chance, there's no way around it, right? And they found me I was looking at an awful lot of time. They were wanting to give me 20, 25 years. They were talking about conspiracy charges and destruction of government property and possession of government. I mean, they don't mess around. I had a fair judge though. The judge, he said when he found me guilty, he said, listen, you may not have known, because I didn't lie when I took the stand. I told him my involvement that I had to do it, but I didn't cut or steal a tree. He said, you know what? You may not have been the one to cut this down, but you did have involvement in it. You knew that these young men were taking trees that didn't belong to them. You may not have known that it came out of the national park, but guess what? It did. And so you're going to jail. He said the prosecution did not prove its case on conspiracy charges. Matter of fact, there were low-level RICO charges too. They were saying I was running an operation that, a major operation here, hiring young kids, teaching them, training them, and sending them out to sell my wood. And he's like, they did not prove their case. But so they charged me with possession of stolen government property and stealing government property, and they sentenced me on a low end of the scale, which was 13 months. I was like, wow, okay. So away to jail I go. Prison again at 50 years old, federal. Things were different though. I knew this was a God experience. God had showed me that this was what was going on. I didn't have understanding why, but it was nonetheless God I knew needed my attention. He showed me that I needed to correct my thinking and decision making, and that's where we lead into where I'm at today, and how I get to this place.
So this is a 30-year journey or more.
Yes. 30 years.
Mark, you're not the first person I've heard who's had a tremendous journey like that, decades long.
Yeah.
Of the many things that amaze me about your story, perhaps the key one is this: God pursued you.
There's that song. I heard it in my head, a number of months ago. The one where where they say, God kicks down walls, climbs over mountains, and pursues you. And that's exactly what he did. God, this is not my doing. I did nothing but wrong things, but God's mercy, I believe it's, and I can look back in this in context, Al, and I can see God's mercy in my whole life. A lot of things, I didn't do anything honestly but be born to the wrong dad. And I can look back at times of abuse and know now. I had a friend named Babby, a make-believe friend. His name was Babby. I believe today, looking back on that was a host of the Lord, no doubt about it. Even in times of terror and abuse, God was there. And he gives you the ability to go through these hard, terrible things. Me and my wife were talking about it the other day, and it's like, the notion sometimes people say, yeah, well, God was there watching. When you get the idea that God's there watching you be abused, that's not a good thought. It's like, God really is sitting there watching me get abused. I don't think it's that. It's not that. To me, it's a knowing. There's a knowing that God has this under control. He's going to get you through this. He's not just, letting evil happen to you. It's just like, I don't know. It's you just know. I know that the Lord was there. It takes time. I mean, look at, we have biblical characters all over the place. Look at Joseph, look at all these people that, and I don't put myself on those levels at all, but I'm just saying, God goes with you into the hard place. And so this, well, in this story, so this, I go to federal prison, and I'm scared about being in this place, because the feds being inside, they wouldn't, because of my record, they didn't put me in a minimum custody place. I'm going inside. And it's a very different environment. Gangs, druids, pagans. I remember I was in line at the commissary one day, and I heard this chanting, and I was like, what is that? And I asked the guy, what's that? He said, that's the pagans. And they've got these real estate. They've got sections of the yard that's theirs, and they're all in a little circle. They're chanting, and they're carrying out their religious practices, and they're right next to the fenced in area for the natives. They got their own real estate there too, right? It's just an amazing system. It's just a whole nother world in the federal system.
Which facility was this?
Sheridan, Oregon.
Sheridan, okay.
Sheridan, Oregon. And so I had purchased a radio off the store, and I was walking around the track one day, and I'm trying to tune in something that is, I don't know, just good, right? I don't want to listen to rock music. I don't want to get wrapped up into, lifting weights and doing all the other things these guys are doing in there. I just, what? I'm just, Lord, where are you and what's going on? What do you wanted me here? Here I am. You have my undivided attention, right? And I'm trying to tune something into my radio. And as I'm tuning in, as I'm flipping through the tuner, I just heard the word Torah. And I'm like, what? And I tuned that in a little bit better. I got to, a matter of fact, I stopped by the bleacher area, and I climbed up the top of the bleachers around the track area there. And I'm trying to tune it in, and I got a little bit of tuned in, and I heard somebody teaching about, the Torah. And I started listening to this. And honestly, I kid you not, I'd never in my life even heard the word Torah. I'd never even heard that word. Why would I hear that word? I've never, there's no reason for it. But I had been going to the Sunday church there in the prison. I'd only been there about a week. But I'd been going to the Sunday church. I've been in constant communication with my mom, and she was, being very helpful and supportive. And I heard this word Torah, and it just struck me like a lightning bolt. I'm like, oh my goodness, what is that? And so I went back to my unit, and I called on the phone. I called my mom. I said, Mom, I don't know what it is, but it's Torah. She's like, yeah, Torah. And I said, so I was tuning in my radio, and I got this station. It was called Hebrew Nation Radio, and there was somebody on there talking about Torah. And I need you to go to their website, and I need you to find everything that they have on the Torah and send it to me. She's like, okay, I'll see what I can come up with. And so she sent me a book. It was, I don't remember what the title was, but it sent me a Brad Scott book, and a Daniel, what's his name? I don't remember what his name was. Anyway, sent me these two books and a whole bunch of stuff that they had on Torah. Anyway, she sent me all these books in, and I just started gobbling them up. But I couldn't get good reception. So I knew it was Hebrew Nation Radio, but I couldn't get good reception there. So I had one of the inmates, who's still a friend of mine today, in there. This guy was just super brainiac. And I told him, I'm just like, Jim, I need some kind of radio antenna hooked up in my room. Can you get me hooked up with that? And so he designed this antenna that went around the inside of my window frame. And he putted that in there with toothpaste and stuff. And it was just an amazing thing. So I had an antenna from my radio. I could get reception, and only at certain times of the day though. So when then I had my mom, I was living through my mom, right? I was like, Mom, I need you to go down to Hebrew Nation Radio, to the Restoration Fellowship there. I need you to meet these people, Dawn and Cindy. I need you to get to know these people and let them know that I'm listening to them. and that I just need you to go see what's going on down there. So my mom did. She drove all the way down from Olympia down to Salem and got to know Don and Cindy. And as it turns out, they were kind of baffled. They're like, we only have a 5-mile broadcasting range. I have no idea how it's being picked up in Sheridan, Oregon. And I'm like, well, I don't either, but guess what? And I did. I got absorbed into this. I was like, oh my goodness. And then now we have another problem. I'm going to church on Sunday. And it's like, now wait a minute. So I find out there's 5 Jews in this practicing Jews in this facility of 2,000 inmates because it's not safe to be a Jew. You know, you got too many pagans and druids and white supremacists. They're openly gang affiliations. And I knew who the Jews were. I had one in my unit. His name was Mark Sams. And I'd gotten friendly with him. So I knew him. And the other ones come from the other units, but I knew them and I knew the head Jew there. And this guy was no weakling. I mean, he was nobody to be messing around with, and that's why he ran the little Jewish clique that they had there. Right, he was the protector. And I went to my friend Mark and I said, Mark, I got a problem. He's like, what? I said, well, I want to keep the Sabbath. How do I keep the Sabbath in here? He's like, oh, well, come with us. You can come do Shabbat with us. I'm like, I don't know if I want to hang with you guys. He's like, why not? And I said, Mark, I'm getting out in 13 months. I'd like to go home in 13 months. I don't know if that could happen if I'm hanging out with the Jews. Right? He's like, don't worry about it. Come on with us. So I said, okay. So and we had some conversation. I talked to him. He knew my understanding with the Messiah. I said, he's not, I don't call him Jesus, though. I call him Yeshua. And I gave him a little bit different perspective, maybe than what they'd ever heard. And they thought that was very odd. But so anyway, come Shabbat, we're going up to the chapel. That's where, everybody met in the chapel that had religious services. The Jews got it on Saturday. They got the Shabbat on the Saturday. So we were walking up there. We met with the other Jews, and the one Jew, Brad, the head Jew, he's like, who's this? And my friend Mark is like, oh, this is Mark. He's a Hebrew. He's like, yeah, okay. So it is the way that I was able to get hooked up with these 5 Jews was miraculous all in itself. And they really accepted me. And what a learning experience for my first education of, Torah observance was to be around Hasidics. And the rabbi for Portland was the rabbi that would come. He would come once a month to meet with him. And so, over 13 months, we became very close. And we had a lot of things happen in there during that time. Jews get special privileges in the federal prison. They had a manual, I'm not kidding you, that was probably 3 or 4 inches thick that the federal system was required to provide, including, kosher meals. So I got special meals. Didn't have to eat the garbage that they presented to everybody else. We got kosher meals. They brought in tens of thousands of dollars worth of food during Passover. Got special food for Passover. There was the big one. So at Passover, because it was special food, it was amazing. Now all of a sudden there's 200 Jews. We call them food Jews because they signed themselves up under the Jewish system in order to get the food. Well, the real practicing Jews would not let them touch the food for Passover. So what ended up happening is we would serve them. They would come in to get their special packages of food, a box of matzah, the gefilte fish, and all this, and the special Passover food that they had brought in special for Passover, and they would just line up, and the staff would bring them the boxes of this stuff, and we would hand them out. We would distribute it to them. what an experience that was. I mean, giving matzah to obvious pagans and white supremacists, but it's just what you did. You had to share this food. So it was quite amazing, this interaction that I had with these guys and with, during these feast days. So they brought in, during Yom Kippur, they brought in, we got a shofar, we got the white robes that they would bring in. And the greatest thing was, Al, they had a library of every Art Scroll book published. So I remember telling my mom, I said, you know what, I went in the library, here's all this, the Mishnah and the Talmuds, all the Talmuds, everything. I'm just like, I told my mom, it's like that. This library was for me because nobody ever uses it. It's all brand new stuff. So I was just having a heyday learning things and participating in the rituals of the Sabbath and the feast days. And yeah, and man, it got to the point, where I remember at one point, probably about 10 months in, Bradley, the head Jew there, he says, you ought to convert. And I'm like, I should, Al. Is there a problem with my belief in Yeshua as a Messiah in that? He's like, yeah, that could be a problem. Yes. So that didn't happen. But I did have the honor of getting wrapped with tefillin when the rabbi came up one time. And he actually asked the head Jew there, asked him in Hebrew if it would have been okay. Should I wrap this going with tefillin? And it was quite an honor to be accepted in that, because they didn't allow people to participate. So there were some issues. There were some issues with some of the other Jews that weren't really favorable, but I had the favor of the head Jew, Bradley, and yeah, he's ex-IDF, he was ex-IDF, doing a life sentence, never getting out, and good friends. He died. He had some terminal illness that I was never privy to, but he did die. And actually, Mark Sams died as well when he got out. But that was my beginning of my Torah experience. So then when I got out, I went to Tacoma and I got hooked up with, I became pretty close to Don and Cindy.
Don and Cindy Wyatt of Hebrew Nation Radio.
Yeah, they were very, very helpful and instrumental to me. I loved them a lot. It's been a lot of ground over the years. It's been a decade. I haven't really stayed in contact. I haven't been in contact with them for a number of years. They had a lot of things happen there at Hebrew Nation Radio that they went through some hard times. But no, I have a lot of love for them. What the service that they provide. We think that people aren't listening and some of these things don't make a difference. I'm here to tell you that it does. If they wouldn't have been broadcasting and I wouldn't have heard that word Torah, then I would never be where I am today. Which where I am today, Al, is light years away from where I was a decade ago.
Well, I'm still amazed at all this happened. God wanted this to happen. He pursued you in spite of yourself. What it tells me is that for all of us, even the best of us, redemption, restoration, all of that happens in spite of us. It is the grace, it is the mercy of our God. He will have his way. It's better if we learn to cooperate early on, but you are one of several people I know who, he's not going to give up.
Unless where he is, when we start talking about the sovereignty of God,
yeah,
he knows his own.
Yeah.
And this is beyond my pay grade of understanding how that works, right? But even the placement of my Torah walk, like I said, I got moved to Tacoma, so I was trying to find some place to go. It was first Sukkot, and my mom was helping me trying to locate some kind of fellowship up there. So I got hooked up with Tim Haig at Beit Hillel, and I was there for a number of years. And through that relationship, though, of those men that I maintain today, I no longer go to Beit Hillel, but some of the relationships that I acquired there, uh, Lord, I can't even believe the men that God has placed in my life, because you got to have other men in your life in order to know how to be a man, and more importantly, you got to have men of God in your life to know how to be a godly man. You need
Amen.
mentors and examples. And so some of the men that I have maintained relationship with today, they've made me, they've been very instrumental in who I am today. And now I have an amazing wife, which is another story in itself, that I even have this, oh man, woman who fears God, that, so integral in my life. So I'm 61 years old now. And, this is a 40-year journey. But I can look back before that, Al. I see the hand of the Lord all through my life,
Yeah.
you know, and his mercy, though. How do you relay and explain his mercy and kindness and understanding, his compassion? Well, he says that's what his name is. We get hung up on the Yod He Vav He pronunciations. When God says his name is, faithfulness, kindness, right?
Yeah.
Mercy. That's who God says his name is. And that's amazing, to have peace in my life, to have peace, and to know that my provisions, my sustenance, my breath that I breathe, because I've done terrible things to my body too, which I'm sure God has healed so many things. The fact that I can even breathe, being around the chemicals and the things that I've done to my life, it's like, I don't think we even know how many things God heals us of. We're asking for healing, we're asking for this, we're asking for that, but God just abundantly blesses us with things that we're not even aware of. Unless we really
Amen.
stop to think about it. But yeah, it's crazy. This journey is crazy. And, we can't do this alone.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about this before. I have, we have a lot of theological differences, but we need us. God needs us all as one new man, right? One new man in the Messiah, Jew and Gentile alike. We
Yes.
cannot do this on our own.
Right.
If it wasn't for the Jews, how would we know? How would we even know how to walk out an obedient lifestyle? And I get in these stupid conversations, it seems, all the times with Christians who are really offended. I want to put people under the law. And I'm just like, why is that the conversation? Because I just want to be obedient. God gave me these instructions, and I'm just like, wow, I'm so fortunate that I don't have to figure this out on my own. Right.
Yes.
And so we need the Jews who have been working this out for millennia, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's possible. We talked about this before, Al. This,
Yeah.
This notion that somehow we can't have relationship, that there's this chasm that is not breachable. It is unbreachable when you're talking about when you're coming at it from the, and I've had these conversations with these Jewish brothers that helped grow me up, right? If you're going to come at it from the Jesus perspective, and I'm not going to get hung up on the word here, because that's not the point, but the Jesus that they know, the crusading Jesus, the Jesus that wants to cause them and has caused them pain, death, and destruction. This is not open for conversation. But if we talk about the Messiah and who Yeshua is as our salvation, as our help, and as the Messiah who kept Torah, the rabbi, my rabbi who kept Torah, and who I'm learning from, we start coming at it from a different perspective. They're just like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, look. And then we can start looking. We can actually break open the scriptures and we can talk about it maybe. And you start, but you got to build a relationship. And so my interaction with these Jewish people, as we talked about, was, in this federal prison, was first a relationship. Of course, it started out of being able to keep the Sabbath, but I wouldn't have been able to keep, they wouldn't allow me to keep the Sabbath with them for very long if there was no relationship. So I didn't try to get in there and convert anybody. There's no reason in talking about it other than the fact that when they tried to ask me to, convert, well, we got to have to talk about this, right? I mean,
Right.
that's like,
Right.
is that going to work? They're like, yeah, because it doesn't matter in the big picture. We stood back to back together over a couple things, a couple times where, it was going to get quite ugly. And I figured that might be it for me too. But I was going to defend my friends, and I was going to take their side, and they would take. So we developed a different kind of relationship than just, doing Shabbat.
Yes.
It was also life and death, because federal prison was a very hard place. I'm making it sound like it was a big, Torah parade, but it wasn't. It was also very, very hard environment to function as. And if you're going to be friends with the Jews, you're going to have a lot of enemies in prison. And so we depended on one another, and they knew that I was down to do whatever it takes. And I knew that vice versa. And that developed over time. So then when you develop that close relationship, right, like that, especially in a harsh environment, then we can have these hard conversations.
Yeah.
Because they know who I am and I know who they are. So,
well, that's just it. It is the relationship aspect.
Yes.
And to go back to our Creator God, that's what He wants with us. So, okay, you learned this in federal prison. And it seems to me it's helped to crystallize all the lessons over the decades prior to that.
Well, it directed my focus.
Yes.
It gave me a path. So I heard these words from the radio station, right? But actually walking them out, I would have had no idea. So being in the relationship with these Jewish men as I was, it helped direct my focus.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. I wasn't able to have theological debates with somebody I didn't know anything about. And good luck with that. I remember when the rabbi comes up, and he had a very limited amount of time. They harassed him when he came in. The guards did. They didn't want him. They gave him a hard time. So he only had so long to come in, and he didn't have much. It was during Purim. And he had brought up a little scroll of Esther. He was going to read, and he's like, "Okay, I don't have very much time, but I want you to know that I'm authorized to read this scroll in Hebrew at 90 miles an hour." And he just started reading that thing in Hebrew. I'm just like, oh my goodness. He was like 30. No, he wasn't quite 30. He was like 29. I knew he was 29 because he was talking about the Zohar, which he was not able to start really studying, although he had been. 30 is their age requirement for studying Zohar, and he whipped out. But you can't read the scroll of Esther if you make a mistake, you got to start over.
Right.
So he blew through that thing so fast, and it's just like, So I got all these introductions to the feast days and the Sabbath. And our rituals weren't like that would have been at Chabad house, okay? Right. Even though they're Hasidics, that was the guys that we were under. I mean, because that was the rabbi was Chabad from Portland, but we didn't have the same. We had the liturgy books, right? We did do the liturgy, but it wasn't the same kind of rituals that you would actually find at a synagogue because we weren't in an environment to be able to carry that out. So I got a lot of introduction to the feast days. That was major, to the feast days, to the Sabbath, and to Torah, and to midrash, real midrash. Boy, it can get ugly, but it's intense. So we had Sephardic. One of them was Sephardic, Spanish. One of them was Sephardic. And then the head Jew there, Brad, he was Ashkenazi. And so you had a difference. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. And here I'm not even Jewish. One of the interesting things that took place, so one of the Jews there, the Sephardic Jews, matter of fact, he had a problem with me. And he was really offended when the rabbi wrapped tefillin with tefillin. That really ticked him off. And so the head guy, Brad, he's like, the Sephardi told me, he says, you need to call the rabbi. They had a rabbi over him in New York, and that's who handled all the, there's a rabbi that deals with all the inmates in a federal prison, right? So we got our own rabbi to talk to. So if the system didn't provide us, if the prison system there didn't provide us, say, kosher food that we liked, he'd just get on the phone to the rabbi. Rabbi call the lawyer call head of Bureau of Prisons and say, hey, this has got to get corrected right now. And they'd be on it. It was just, it was an amazing system that was privileged to fall under. But he called the rabbi and he says, okay, so here's the deal. I got this guy. I got this goyim who's been hanging with us, doing the Sabbath, doing the feast days, and we're not sure what to do with him. He's got a belief in, Jesus as the Messiah, and some of the guys got a problem with him, but he's associating with it. He's linking himself to us. And he said the rabbi's response to him was, hey, who in their right mind in a prison system that is racist and dangerous to have association with the Jews, who in their right mind would have that association if he wasn't Jewish? He said, I don't know. Maybe he's got Jew in him. I don't know. He said, well, just let him be. If he's for you, he's for you. If he's not against you, he's not against you. Just, you know what? Let him be. Accept him. And if there's no problems, what?
That gets to one of my favorite sayings of Yeshua in Mark 9, where he says, those who are not against us are for us.
Right.
And similar circumstances as well. But wow.
Yeah, the rabbis. So once I get the stamp with the rabbi in New York, it's like it's over. There's no more up for discussion, right? But it was like his response was, hey, who knows what's going on here, but if he's wanting to be a part of the Jews there, then let him be.
Amen.
And that was it. So that was never a topic of discussion anymore, and they just accepted me. We had great friendships, and we had so many experiences that I treasure forever. And I wish that we were able to find a way to communicate even today. And I don't know what the answer is for that, because, there's no other way to the Father, let's be realistic, other than through Yeshua, right? That's the fact. Right. But there's more to that. How do we get to that point? There's more to that. We got to be able to bridge these relationships somehow.
Yeah.
And it's important. It's to all of our advantage, because Al, like I said, how am I? This directs my focus for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
This interaction with these Jews in that place directs my actions for the rest of my life. And if we don't have that interaction, if we don't have that direction, if we don't have that help, and I'm not, don't get me wrong. Judaism, come on. I've studied enough of it to know just how wrong, how messed up it is. No less than messianic messiness or Christianity or any other. We're all messy, right? We're all messed up, and we all depend solely on the mercy and the grace of the Lord.
Yeah.
But He's faithful. He's going to lead us home. He's going to lead us to that place, and then He's going to reset all this for us, and we're going to not have to have these arguments and disagreements. And when we have a king that's sitting on the throne, that we don't even know what it's like to be in a monarchy, do we?
No.
Can you imagine how that's going to be?
Well, Mark, we could go on for another hour, but this is probably a good place to call it a halt for now. But thank you so much for sharing your story. There's so much in there.
Yeah, there's so much in that journey, but we all have these stories, and something we've been doing. So we have a home group right now. Something we've been doing now is we decided each week we meet on a Rev Shabbat. Each week, somebody's going to give their testimony. So we've done this now for the last 3 weeks. If somebody, and then that person gives their testimony, and then they say who they want next to go. These testimonies. I went to Beit Hillel for almost a decade, Al, and it's funny how many people I didn't know. Really, I don't know. I mean, I'm interacting with them, but I really don't know them. So the ones that I've gotten to know, their testimonies, how impactful that's been in our relationship. And I think that we need to be more inclined to hear people's testimonies. How did you come to where you are? Because God is not a box God. He didn't do the things that he guided you through, Al, are night and day to the way that he guided me through, but they're just as relevant and significant. And I think we need to have these conversations so that we're so stuck on the practicing of, getting it all right with our, processes of how we do the Sabbath and how we do the feast. I think we need to spend a lot more time relating and hearing people's journey and their stories and their testimonies.
Amen.
I find it very encouraging.
Yes, and that's exactly what we want to do at Reunion Roadmap is collect the stories and share them with the world.
Well, I enjoy being a part of it, Al, and I try to do my best to make sure Reunion Roadmap's really got an amazing amount of content. So, of course, we've talked about it. I'm looking to ways to be able to maybe increase that audience through some website interactions. The website thing too, Al, that's a whole nother story. How I got to become a web designer. That was a God thing too. That's what I use it for. Right. That's most of the work that I do is with faith-based organizations.
Yeah. And again, thanks for what you do for us at bnayosefna.com and for the many other organizations that you serve. So, Mark Randall, it has been a joy to hear your story. Thanks for sharing with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Al.